as we gear up for an exciting afternoon packed with inspiring talks and thought provoking ideas, we'd once again like to extend our gratitude to our gold sponsors, Upgrad, Whatfix, and Canara Bank, as well as our silver sponsor, ICICI. Now let's move on to our next speaker, Nanditha Jayaraj. Miss Nanditha is a renowned independent science writer known for her compelling storytelling and insightful perspectives in the world of science. Along with Aashima Dogra, she co-founded the feminist science media known as The Life of Science in 2016. She has also authored books such as Anna's Extraordinary Adventures with Weather and 31 Fantastic Adventures in Science. Her recent release, Lab Hopping, published by Penguin Books, won a Laadli Media Award for gender sensitivity. Please welcome Ms. Nanditha to the stage.
Almost exactly 9 years ago, my friend Aashima Dogra and I started a traveling science media project. Aashima started to travel across North India, Central India, and the West of India, and I covered the South and East. Our goal was to try and visit as many scientific laboratories as possible in our country. But we had a secondary goal, and that was to understand how rare is it really to find a woman working in these science labs. Now, why would it be rare? I think the messaging starts much earlier when we were in school, right? When we started hearing about these special chemical equations, and they're named after some scientist or the other who happened to be male. And then, of course, we have the fathers of evolution, fathers of astronomy, father of AI, father of the atomic bomb. So it just kind of seemed to us that when it came to science, there probably haven't been too many contributions by women. Maybe women just weren't doing much science. It was only when Aashima and I started to co-edit this science magazine for children called Brainwave that we really began to question this. Because here at the magazine, we had been entrusted with the responsibility of giving our very young readers, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, probably their first impressions of science and what science looks like and what it actually encompasses. And this was a responsibility we didn't take lightly, and we didn't want to just keep perpetuating these stories that we might have grown up learning. So we thought, let's dig a little deeper and find out, let's first confirm that we have the right story, because we don't want to be giving these young minds a false impression. So let's take a topic like nuclear fission. Now, when I say nuclear fission, what comes to most of our minds? Probably Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the horrible atomic bombs during World War II, or maybe Chernobyl, or if maybe you watched Oppenheimer in the past couple of years, and that's what comes to mind. If you look at the person who won the Nobel Prize for the discovery of nuclear fission, you will find out about this guy called Otto Hahn. But it's only when you really dig a little deeper and you read a little between the lines that you find out that the person who pioneered this discovery was Lise Meitner. She was an Austrian-Swedish nuclear scientist, and she really, if you read the whole story, you can say she co-discovered it, but she played without her it would not have happened. So examples like these, started to increase the more we started looking, and we realized that, okay, we were wrong. Women have in a significant way advanced our understanding of, the truths of our universe in the past 200 years. And there are more of them doing science in the current day. Still, when it came to Indian women in science, the names were still far and few between. I think things have changed a little bit now, but when we started this 9 years ago, we would start most of our interactions like this, asking our audience to name an Indian woman scientist. And if we were lucky, we would get a Kalpana Chawla who isn't even, by nationality, she wasn't Indian anymore, but we would not get any other names. So, are there Indian women in science? And that's why we went into this traveling science media project that we call lab hopping. We went into it with a doubt in our minds, maybe we wouldn't be successful, maybe we would find too few women in science. But as it turned out, we had no problem at all. These are just some randomly picked photographs from some of the people that we met in our very first year of lab hopping. And the person, the person over here, her name is Rachel. I met her in Hyderabad in 2016, and she's a molecular biologist. So if you can make out from her face and body language, she's super excited, she's beaming, there's a spark in her eye, and that's not because she's unusually photogenic for a scientist. It's because of she just received by a parcel of the thing that she's holding in her hand, which is a small sort of DNA sequencing gadget called Minion. And she was really eager to try out this new technology to use it in her research. And this is just one a small example of why it was so exciting for me to be conducting these interviews, because I got to see, first of all, I thought women in science are very rare, but like when we did find them, they were equally excited. They were equally, you could see the brilliance in action. They had just as much passion. They had just as much ownership of the labs. To them, they were it an oddity. They did not feel strange in the space. They love science and they're here because of it. So these kind of experiences really challenged also many stereotypes I had in my head about women in technology. Women are not cut out for techie kind of things, or even older people, right? We think older people don't want to use new tech, and she was like a year away from retirement when I met her, and here she was just as excited as any of us about the newest iPhone or Xbox or whatever. So as we started over the next 3 years, we collaborated with science writers all over India. We met hundreds of women scientists, and we conducted interviews and published the interviews on our website, thelifeofscience.com. They're still up there. And the key takeaway for us really is, when it comes to aptitude and a passion for science, gender has nothing to do with it. That said, it would be a lie to say that gender doesn't matter in science. And I will bring to your notice one particular statistic, which is kind of a favorite among those of us who study this issue in India, because it's also a statistic that sets India apart from the rest of the world. I mean, there is a women in STEM problem all over the world, but it doesn't look the same way in every region. In India, for example, if you look at the people who have trained themselves to be scientists, and if I'm defining that as people who have a PhD, so people who have gone through this grueling 5, 6, sometimes 7 years to get this PhD degree with the idea that you want to do science, or you want to be in academics, or you want to be a scientist, the gender gap isn't that wide. For more than 10 years now, at least 40% of our science PhDs have been women. And 40% is not really a stat we associate with an alarming gap, right? But the alarming bit happens after that. So from this pretty decent pool, when it comes to people who are actually working in the workforce, doing science, doing research, that number dips to 15%. And in places of great repute like IITs and IISc and possibly even IIIT, though I haven't checked, the number is even lesser than that. So what is happening here? As journalists, Aashima and I were too skeptical of this idea of the theory that women are making the choice that they, after being trained to become scientists, suddenly overnight they decide, okay, I want to prioritize my family and I cannot manage to do science, and they're dropping out of their free will. That seemed too simplistic to us as people who are, as young women who are going through our own trajectories in science. We thought there might be more to it. So it was this statistic really that got us thinking about what is causing this sharp drop. And then we realized we're sitting on a gold mine, because by now we had hundreds and hundreds of hours of in-depth interviews of women working in all kinds of fields and all kinds of labs all over the country. And why not go back to these interviews? And they've spoken to us right about their childhoods to the workplace in great detail about the positives, about the negatives. So we started going back to these interviews and reading a little more into it. And that's when the patterns emerged. And really, for us, it is really these patterns that gave us a better idea of the gender gap beyond just numbers. So I just want to throw to you a few quotes that we heard from women that we interviewed while we were on this lab hopping journey. And we'll start with this one. So this was a scientist at an IIT. She told us that when she was in her job hunting stage, at one point she was facing a hiring panel, and she was asked by one of the men on the hiring panel about, your husband is in the Netherlands and you are applying for a job here, how are you going to manage? And this person, let's call her Bindu, she was really irritated because she felt like, why is this even a question to be asked? What does this have to do with my aptitude? What does it have to do with my suitability for the job? And why would anybody think that I've come for this interview without having thought this through, right? But the thing that disturbed her more is that she felt that if I was the one working in Netherlands and it was my husband here doing this interview, he would not have to face this question. Another example is of a scientist who, when I met her, she had already retired from ISRO. And she told me when she was in her early days in ISRO, probably in the 70s, she was leading a small team where they were asked to develop electronic equipment that would help soldiers communicate in extreme climate regions, kind of like a primitive walkie-talkie. And so she led that team, and they actually came up with this prototype, and now it was time to do the testing, but she wasn't allowed to go because the management would not allow her to go because she was the only woman there and it might not be safe for her. Another instance is of the director of a research institute who told me this. Sometimes if there's a position for which a guy and a girl apply, I'll take the guy because I already have so many women. They will have to run away at 4:30 p.m. to catch a bus and go home because the baby is waiting. Now, in these politically correct times, it might sound very shocking, and oh my God, how can she be, So, yeah, when I said she, by the way, this person was a woman, which is another thing to think about. But if you're a working woman in the workplace, you'll realize that whether people say this or not, this thinking is very much present. And if you're really honest to yourself, and if you are a person in a leadership position, you may be able to admit that the thought has crossed your mind as well. It doesn't make us monsters, it just makes us products of, our society. Finally, Kolkata-based scientist, she was laughing and telling me this incident about how when she was in her BSc, her chemistry teacher, a young faculty at the time, used to say very abusive things to girls. He used to say that our only purpose was for decorating the class. Now you can laugh this off, that's how most of us deal with situations, especially they're just words at the end of the day. But if you think about, maybe a lot of these girls in his classroom would have gone ahead and reached positions where imposter syndrome is very real. And these kind of comments that you faced really play and feed into this feeling that I'm not good enough. But I'm more concerned about the boys, the young men who would have been in that classroom, who heard an authority figure, their professor, say this, and it might have validated certain ideas they had in their head and made them think it was okay to say these things. And to imagine that many of them would have turned into colleagues and bosses of young women in science is a really a horrific thing for me to imagine, and it's really unfair. Anyway, I don't want to go on about this, but these were just some examples of patterns, and the patterns are in red. For example, the pattern or the theme of thinking of the income of a woman as a second. If you're a working woman, then your income is just a secondary income, and therefore your job is not as important as your husband's job. Benevolent sexism is a term that is used to describe discriminatory behavior, but the kind of thing where you're told something and hey, this is unfair, this is being done to me because of my gender, but it's positioned in such a way that it's for your own good, it's for your own safety. So it's kind of like a compassionate, benevolent sexism, which is also, we see a lot of flavors of these. These are just some examples. And then, of course, the stereotype that if you are a woman, then your lifestyle is, your priorities are a certain way, your lifestyle is a certain way. And sexual harassment, which is, I could go on and on about this, but it's a lot more common in science labs in India than we may think. The other thing we realized that, after years of doing this work, after investigating and trying to understand the nature of the gender gap in India, is that it is really futile and even dangerous to try and push all women in science into one group. To imagine that these issues that we talk about affect all women equally, and to imagine that these are the only issues affecting all women. Because even among the women who are and who do work in science, is 15% that I was talking about, the women that we were interviewing, almost all of them, I would say more than 90% of them belong to the privileged or so-called upper castes. Almost all of them were able-bodied. Almost all of them were cis women. Maybe we interviewed one or two trans men and women scientists while we were doing our work. But when we did talk to the occasional people from these subcategories, we realized that the dimension of issues that they face is completely removed, completely separate, and when we try and force everybody into one category, we end up invisibilizing them. We end up actually doing them more harm than good. So I don't want to go into too much into a 20-minute talk, but that was an important realization for us. And so all of these things that we kept finding out, we weaved into a book that we wrote, which is also called Lab Hopping, which came out in 2023. And we talk about the things that we found out. We talk about the patterns that we saw. The second part of the book is noticing patterns. And the third part of the book, we wanted to be a little constructive, So where to from here? We all talk about issues a lot, and there are so many issues to talk about. It's very important we do that. But we also need to talk about where to from here. So the question is, what will it take for us to reduce the gender gap, to bridge the gender gap in our country? And there are several approaches that are being taken. One popular approach is to inspire more girls into STEM. You may have come across many initiatives in this regard, like Girls Who Code, or several other things. The idea is to inspire more girls into getting into science. But if you think about that statistic I told you, our problem with respect to gender is not really with getting more girls into science. That is an important thing too. But I think maybe there are also many boys and all kids of all genders who really need this kind of inspiration. And we have to think about, okay, we're putting more and more girls into the science pipeline. Maybe our girls doing PhDs increase. But if they're not getting jobs, what is the point? Aren't we doing a disservice? So these are just both sides of the thing, of this approach. Second approach is affirmative action, which refers to any measure that is taken to directly boost the numbers. So, like these kind of approaches are, you're playing the long game. You're envisioning that in the next 10 years it will pay off. But very often, it's been decades of us trying and things haven't changed. So we need to take affirmative action initiatives. For example, in 2022, Indian Institute of Science held a special recruitment drive for women. So they were specifically recruiting women professors because their numbers were so pathetic. The drawback to this again is reservation is another affirmative action measure, by the way. And if you do these things without sensitizing the workforce, sensitizing the student body, it can turn into a really bad thing for the people who do enter through these measures. And I think a really ugly example of this was during COVID in IIT Kharagpur. Maybe some of you remember when somebody recorded this one professor speaking really abusively, really in a casteist manner to her classroom, which consisted of students who came in via reservations and were receiving this extra class before they joined. So these kind of attitudes, again, you think you're fixing a problem, but you might be making it worse. Third kind of approach is more recognition for women in science. Incentivize them, recognize them with awards, with schemes, with fellowships. And if you go to the Department of Science and Tech, you get this list of prizes for women scientists. But simultaneously, while this is happening, when our top prizes, like the Bhatnagar Award, which is now called the Rashtriya Yuva Vigyan Puraskar, I think, and the other, Infosys prizes, and all of the other regular top tier prestigious science prizes, sometimes you have 20 winners and not one is non-male. Then the signal that is giving you is that women are only good enough when we give them partial treatment, right? So we need to be conscious of both these things. And finally, more discussion on women in science issues, like what is happening here. Again, here also there's something to watch out for. One of the first large-scale discourses on women in science was in 2008, when there was a big national science conference in Delhi where 2,000 women scientists convened, and they had a lot of. It was a landmark. I mean, we write about this particular conference in our book. It was a landmark event in many ways. But in one science journal, Current Science, there was an editorial by two women scientists who were present at this conference, and they pointed out that, see, this was all great, but in many of the sessions, we were sitting there discussing issues, discussing our science, talking about what we've done, and more often than not, the audience had almost no men. So why are we sitting here talking amongst ourselves about things we already know? Is this really fruitful? So again, the point is to keep, critiquing and getting better. So what will it take for the gender gap to be bridged? Now, I don't want you to take away that all of these approaches are bad. You don't just abandon an approach because you're facing a hurdle, right? I think it's more about, we need all of these. We need all of these, but maybe we need to be doing it differently. Maybe we need to question the implementation, question our motives. Because I think one of our previous speakers also spoke about this a lot, about why do we want diversity, right? We have to recognize that the reason we want more women in science, or want more people from marginalized castes, or more disabled people in science, is not because we should see them as charity cases and because we should help them. That's not the attitude, and that's, it's very unconstructive to go about it, and unsustainable to go about it with this attitude. We have to recognize that science needs it. Society needs it. We are always talking about why Indian science, Indian tech is not world class yet. We are always talking about why has science failed to solve so many of our fundamental issues in society today. Maybe that's because for years, for more than 100 years, our science has been done by a very, very small group of people, a small demographic of people, and perhaps having a greater diversity of people in our scientific ecosystem can really help with this. So we have to recognize that we need this too. So you're not helping anyone by being more inclusive. These are just, two books that Aashima and I have co-written. One is targeted at younger audiences. It's about women who are doing science in India today. Lab hopping is the more journalistic investigation of the gender gap. We speak with not just women scientists, even male scientists. We speak with the big bosses, we speak with government officials, and we try to come to the bottom of why, despite so much dialogue, despite so much attempt, the numbers haven't yet improved yet. Why could that be? Is it just a matter of time? What are the models from the West that we could adopt and what doesn't fit here? So all of that is in lab hopping. Both of these books are published by Penguin. You can find them on Amazon, or you can convince your local bookstores to get a few copies. A lot of you might be students, so I understand if you can't purchase the book, but please do inform your libraries to get a few copies so it can be accessible to more people. With that, I will end my talk.
Thank you, Ms. Nanditha, for your thought-provoking talk. Your insights into the challenges and resilience of women scientists across field was both eye-opening and inspiring. We now open the floor for questions from the audience. Please raise your hand if you have a question and we'll get a mic to you.
I think I have two questions sort of things. Maybe they are partly observations too, or suggestions. One is because of the historical precedent, there are more men in the area of science or most of the intellectual pursuits. Now, if we pitch the problem as getting more women into science, okay, the flavor the conversation takes, implicitly or explicitly puts us on the wrong side of the law, in the sense that we are part of the problem. I'm not saying what our conscious mind is saying. I'm saying what our subconscious reads from this, and partly the reason why there might have been very few people in the Women of Science in Science conference is probably men may have thought that oh, this is a place where the narrative is that the large number of men is the problem. Let's cut it out. Something like that. Right? I can't speak on behalf of others. So what I'm trying to say is diversity is definitely a very serious problem, and most of us, without any debate, would agree that we need representation from diverse group of people for our own benefit. We will all benefit from that. I think there cannot be any debate on that. Why can't we look at the fact that there are few women in science as an instance of diversity problem and treat it that way, so that men also feel included as part of the solution? That is one part of the problem, a question that I have. The other part of the question is, why couldn't we look at what is causing this continuous drift to happen? As we are discussing, lack of diversity emerges in various ways. For example, we in this geographical background suffer a lot of discrimination, let's say at the hand of Wests. So we understand what diversity is, regardless of which gender we belong to. So why can't we pitch or address this problem as a problem of diversity? This is my question.
I do see it as a diversity problem. In fact, that's why I said that we cannot, bunch all women into victim and bunch all males into oppressors. But I kind of see things a little differently from what you do. Like, you seem to say that a lot of men feel bad because we are kind of like blaming them, saying it is your problem. I don't see that, I see that if a male colleague does even the smallest thing, the appreciation they get is enormous. Well, sometimes me being a critical journalist, I'm like, they just did the basic minimum. Why you guys, we don't have to like garland every man who is treating people equally. So, I feel, I personally, everyone might not agree, but I think that if it's maybe worth thinking about, if not only for men, even for people from privileged castes, to believe that they are part of the problem, is maybe something that you need to battle with in our minds. How much of my privilege as a person from a privileged caste, has come out of the oppression that I am also probably inflicting right now, that my ancestors have been inflicting for centuries. We need to, those of us who are fortunate enough to be here, need to really, quoting one of the previous speakers, get uncomfortable. And I think there's one of the reasons we're moving really slow in this dream of gender parity is because we're very, very tentative in our steps. In India, especially, there's so much of worshipping our seniors, of we don't want to offend them, that we have to be really, really tentative, really, really gentle. It's so frequent to hear, very senior people on stage say really offensive things. I can think of even very recent examples that have happened, but nobody speaks out against them. So it feels like, okay, we know diversity is a good thing, but it's not as good as keeping your gurus feeling respected. So, I think it's something to grapple with, and I do know that there's a debate here, but I think we should just keep having those debates and maybe getting to a place with some actionable outputs. Thank you.
So, very warm good afternoon, ma'am. Very good presentation. So, my name is Rohan. I just want to ask a simple question, that is, as you said about the the hegemony of the social disparity against women towards science and research. So, what's your look upon the media psychology? That how does the media portrays the thing? So, which draws to 4 pointers I can think about. So, first is the perception, social construct, and the cultural aspects of the society. So, do you see such difference in the West and India? So, what's your take on the difference on the science and technology towards women?
Between the West and in India?
Yeah, between the West and India, and what's you think that the role of media psychology plays into it?
Media psychology, you said?
Yeah. So, like, how does
like popular media?
Yeah, popular media, like social media and television and other OTT platforms. Yeah.
So there's many differences. One thing is that at least still in India, in the West, there was one big problem was how toys, for example, were being marketed. Barbies, the color pink versus blue, and boys were only given one type of toys, which were more mentally stimulating, and girls were only given dolls. And now a lot of their movements are to sort of reverse that kind of early childhood difference. And in India, we did have a lot of that. I'm speaking both from personal experience and from the scientists that we've interviewed in their childhoods. And so we got the impression that we don't really, at least for a long time till now, there's a lot of social media influence, global influence, but at least in the 90s or so, we didn't really raise our children, give them different toys to play with just because they were a boy or a girl. So maybe that is why even in schools, like in my school, for example, almost always the maths topper was a girl till high school, and then I don't know what happened. And that was very normal for us, for the first rank, second ranks to be girls. So that I noticed also when I went on an exchange trip to the US, and I was hearing the conversation that was happening there, and I realized that okay, this is like one kind of good thing that we have here. Now with urbanization and so much social media influence, there is also, I think maybe things are changing a little bit with our toddlers, our young girls suddenly like unicorns and these strange kind of choices. So that is one thing, and that also probably reflects in the statistic, the PhD, why we have so many women, because nobody does a PhD without a feeling that I'm good at this subject. It's not something you just jump into, and we have so many women who feel they're good at that. So that is one difference. The other difference, of course, on the surface of it, it seems like the West is doing a lot more to address the issue. In many ways there is, but also the optics there, like the need, they have to show to the outside world like they're doing a lot. So if very often you see people who are working in there and say, okay, things might look rosy on the outside, but it's not ideal on the inside. Yeah, whereas here we're kind of like you see what you get. There are still people saying, politically incorrect things, which is bad, but in a way at least it lets you see the problem for what it is. Nobody's pretending. So you see, okay, this problem is here. Yeah, it's a big question, but I don't want to take too much time. I'm happy to chat later.
I just wanted to say something that might be music to your ears and to the audience. At IIIT, we have an absolutely inclusive kind of an environment when it comes to research. Last 10 years, the number of women research scholars who have graduated are more than the men. And we have, at the moment, more than 55% of our research scholars, Master of Science by Research and PhD students. 55% and more are women. I just wanted to say.
Thank you.
I would now like to invite Videsh to felicitate Ms. Nanditha with a memento in recognition for her contributions.